Aloha and welcome to the Center for Chinese Studies webinar at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. My name is Jonathan Pettit from the Department of Religions and Ancient Civilizations. This webinar series is hosted by the Center for Chinese Studies and seeks to foster interdisciplinary understanding of mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and other Chinese-speaking societies worldwide, as well as to explore the enduring connections between Chinese civilization and Hawaii. Open and free for all, this series is one of the center's primary means of engaging with scholars in Chinese studies across the globe. Today's format will feature few presentations followed by a Q&A session. So please use the Q&A tool to submit your questions for our speakers, and you can do this throughout the talks. There's also a chat function. If you press that button, you can ask any kind of logistic matters of maybe your audio is not working, and we can work behind the scenes to help you. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the leadership of Acting Director Dr. Baoyun Cheng, Associate Director Dr. Ni Zhang, and Assistant Adriana Choi. So thanks to their tireless efforts, programs like this webinar are made possible. So mahalo for joining us for the special session titled Global China, Local Cultures, Cultural Interactions on the Belt and Road Initiative. So this spotlights the work of the Global China Local Cultures research team at the Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. This group has been investigating how China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, often understood through economic and political lenses, also generates complex cultural and religious encounters along its expanding routes. Their work reveals how local communities across Asia and Africa negotiate the meanings, opportunities, and frictions that arise as global infrastructures intersect with local worlds. So we are honored to welcome three distinguished members of this team, Professor David Palmer, jointly appointed in anthropology and sociology at the University of Hong Kong, present the religious factor on the Belt and Road. His talk outlines three interrelated levels of religious dynamics, local, transnational, and geopolitical, to illuminate how faith communities and spiritual movements participate in and respond to the BRI's globalizing processes. Dr. Joseba Estevez, Research Assistant Professor in the Asian Religious Connections Cluster at HKIHSS, will follow with infrastructures and cosmological friction in Northern Laos. His ethnographic research examines how Lanten Yao and other ethnic groups engage with the rapidly expanding railway, hydro, and development infrastructures in the Golden Triangle. Dr. Rundong Ning, RGC postdoctoral fellow at HKIHSS, will conclude with Marketing Africa. His presentation investigates how Chinese entrepreneurs and influencers represent Africa through live streaming and short video platforms, revealing the affective economies and digital imagination shaping China-Africa relations in the 21st century. Together, these presentations invite us to rethink the Belt and Road not merely as an infrastructural or geopolitical project, but as a dynamic arena of cultural exchange, negotiation, and imagination, a space where global China meets local worlds. Once again, thank you for joining us. Now let us turn to our first speaker, Professor David Palmer.
Okay, so let me share my screen here. Um, oh, 1 second. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Jonathan, and hello, everybody. Aloha to all of you who are in Hawaii and to everybody else, wherever you are in the world. And really glad to have this chance to briefly share some of our reflections on the work of our research team here at the University of Hong Kong on global China local cultures. So there are three of us, and each of us is going to be speaking for about 15 minutes. And I'll begin with this short presentation on the religious factor in the Belt and Road. So I realize that I'm going to be trying to pack what is often a 1.5 hour presentation into about 15 minutes. So I'll be rushing through, but basically the point is just to give in a sense, a framework to look at what is actually a huge topic. This is a project that began, or the idea for this project began when Jos, who's going to be speaking right after me, and I were doing some field work in Northern Laos on the Lanten Yao ethnic minority. I'm a researcher of Taoism and Chinese religion, and that's what, if anybody knows about my work, that's what you probably know me. You probably know about me through my work on Chinese religion and Taoism. And since almost 10 years ago, now I've been collaborating with Jos, who's been doing a long-term anthropological research in northern Laos on the study of the religion of the Lanten Yao ethnic minority there. So doing field work there, we were looking already at the religious life of local communities, but in a region that at one time was relatively isolated, but has become part of a hub of infrastructures being built through Chinese investments on the China-Lao Railroad. And that's really what got us to think about the impact or the interactions between the Belt and Road Initiative and religious communities in general. And so this became the beginning for a series of major collaborative grants, which led us to investigate the religious factor in all different aspects of the Belt and Road Initiative. So if we just look at this map here with different colors representing different religious traditions, we can see that the BRI, the major roots of the BRI, go through countries that are primarily or deeply religious. China is an officially atheist country, but most BRI countries are deeply religious. China strictly controls religion while it hopes to deepen and intensify exchanges and engagement with these highly religious countries. So the question then um, by which I began this project is to what extent does religion become a factor in the deepening relationships between China and BRI countries? Um, and before we even start thinking about this question, we have to remember that perhaps one could say that China is the most religiously ambiguous and complex country in the world. If we just map on the religious demographics onto the different countries in the BRI, we would see that most countries of the world actually have one dominant religious tradition or one dominant religious culture. They may be highly pluralistic, may be a lot of diversity in many different countries, but ultimately they all that diversity kind of revolves around one dominant majority religious tradition, but that's not the case in China. We don't know. There is no single dominant religious tradition. It's a combination of three or more. Um, there's also the question as to whether China is religious or secular. It's an officially atheist country, but again, there's deep religiosity, and major parts of China are predominantly Buddhist and Muslim, as well as some other ethnic minority religions. So, what is the religious factor of China already is pretty complicated, let alone to talk about the religious factor of the BRI. But anyway, we started this grant in 2019 called Infrastructures of Faith, Religious Mobilities in the Belt and Road. And through this grant, we built up an international team of collaborators from several countries who are working on field sites in different countries of the world. And we also were able to to have some postdocs at the University of Hong Kong. And basically, what happened was that when we started doing the research, when the research on religion in the Belt and Road started to become more advanced and to deepen, it became obvious that you can't separate religion from the rest of the cultural and social dimensions of a country. And so the second grant was really more called Chinese Modernity and Soft Power on the Belt and Road, expanded the remit to cover the more all dimensions of culture. And so then our team, we kind of rebranded it as Global China Local Cultures. But anyway, back to the question of religion. So, one of the first outputs, if you're interested in learning more about this research, one of the first outputs was published just not too long ago, or actually just about a year ago, in Modern Asian Studies, an edited volume on the sacred dimensions of the BRI's infrastructural commons, in which we have some case studies covering countries such as Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and so on. Um, and with the collaborators of our project and guest speakers who were working on different cases, we looked at all different many different cases in many different countries. After the pandemic ended, I was able to do some field research in the Middle East, in South Asia, and South Africa, and so basically what I'm trying to do right now is, in a sense, we've done a lot of work on various different case studies. So what's the big picture here? And in a sense, what I'm working on now is what might be called a sequel to the book that I co-authored before, The Religious Question in Modern China, and now will be a book which is called Global China in a Religious World. So what happens when China, with its religious configuration, engages becomes a key element of global society, a global society which on the whole is a very religious global society. And so the framework that I want to take as we look out from China to the world is actually to take is to build a framework of religion which is derived from how we can operate, conceptualize and operationalize religion, um, looking out from China. And that's really what we have here on this slide is um, a kind of a three-pronged model of religion, where you, on the one hand, you have the sacralization of the state, the imperial sacralizations. And local communities, you have local sacralizations. And in between these two, you have different institutional religions, sectarian movements, salvational movements that are somewhere in between the sacralization of the imperial state and the sacralizations of local communities. So kind of trans-local, trans-regional networks. So this is kind of a scheme of religion that can be derived from C.K. Jung and a lot of the studies of religion that have been conducted in the anthropology and history of religion. And so now what if we kind of flip that, or if we kind of extend this model to look at the contemporary world in general and not just China. So what we would see is a frame where anywhere in the world we have national sacralization, the sacralization of the nation or the sacralization of the state. So that's kind of one layer. And so at that level, we're going to have the geopolitics between these sacralized nation states. Then at the bottom, we have local sacralities all over the world. How are local environments, local communities, what are their forms of sacralization? And so in those contexts, what are the relationships with BRI projects? And then in the middle, these spiritual networks, institutionalized religion. So these are translocal religious networks that circulate. And so we have transnational circulation. So this is really what we see when we're looking at the religious factor in the BRI. That's what I'm going to be looking at. There are really three different layers, and it turns out that they're quite independent from each other, although they have a lot of interactions with each other. So what's the religious factor in geopolitics, in the relationships between nation states? What's the religious factor in transnational religious circulations? And then what's the religious factor when projects come into local communities? So first of all, to look very briefly at nation states and geopolitics. Um, so, well, we could talk about the two crescents. The core of the Belt and Road consists of primarily Muslim countries. And well, we all know that so we have China's very close relationships now with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, even no problems in dealing with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, with China was one of the first countries to engage with the Taliban government. So what we could see is right away that's kind of one of the surprising elements of the current of China's current engagements with the world is really no problem for the atheist Chinese atheist socialist China to be engaging with these countries in which Islamic religion is core uh, to their identities. But then we also have another religious dimension, or quasi or sacralizing dimension here, which is coming from the United States. This notion that what I would call a universalizing gospel of either democracy or Christianity, or really positing the whole world as between good and evil, right? There's the good people, and then there's the evil, the axis of evil that needs to be destroyed or that needs to be conquered. And so there's this, even in secular countries, there can be a very strong dimension of sacralization, a kind of missionizing zeal to propagate certain sacred values. So basically, then and I just really won't have time to get into this, but I think it's very interesting. So I've devised a typology of three different types of nation level sacralization. And so the first one, which I call type one, is universalizing sacrality. It's when United States or some other Western countries in either Christian or secular forms, such as democracy, or Soviet and Maoist communism during the Cold War, you have this idea that in our country embodies some sacred values that need to be spread and established in other countries. So this is a universalizing sacrality. Another one, type two, is apocalyptic or sectarian sacrality, where the sacrality of the nation or of the state is deeply connected to some apocalyptic visions of end times. Um, and that doesn't mean that the whole world needs to adopt that, but the relationship with the world is shaped by those apocalyptic visions. And the type three is national sacrality, where actually national interests trump religious identity. And so state religion or ideology is nationalized in the interests of the nation. And so, really, what we find, and this is the key to understanding the religious dimension in the BRI at the geopolitical level, is that most major countries in Eurasia, including China and most Muslim countries, are this. In fact, they they subordinate religion to their national interests. And so, in three states, religion is internally subordinated to the nation state and externally deployed as an instrument of diplomacy and soft power to advance the interests of the state. So therefore, what we have is at the geopolitical level, China engages as a type 3 sacred nation state with other type 3 sacred nation states on the basis of realism. Religion is only one of many cultural and historic factors that may have positive soft power or diplomatic uses, or that may have slight negative complicating effect, but is not an important factor in China's relations with most other countries. Now, then it's interesting that with type 2 apocalyptic movements, China doesn't figure within those countries' apocalyptic scenarios. So therefore, with countries such as Iran and Israel, the relationships with China, they may be very complicated, but they've tended to be on the basis of realism, and the religious dimension has generally not been one of the complicating figures. Now, then with the type 1, the universalizing sacralities, this has been pretty interesting because it has shifted. It's currently undergoing transformation with what's going on both in America and Europe. And so I won't really get into it at this time. We also have an interesting configuration in South Asia where the religious dimension is so you have China having very good relations with the Muslim countries or Buddhist countries that surround India. Very good relations with Pakistan, with and being a factor, an important factor with Sri Lanka, with Bangladesh and the Maldives. And the religious factor is not really between China and India, but the religious factor is between those countries and India, and that impacts or that reinforces those countries' relationships with China. So that was at the geopolitical level. The second level is at transnational religious circulations. And this is very simple, and we could just go through hours of really interesting examples of these circulations, whether it's, for example, Iwu, Muslim traders in Iwu, um, Africans now settling in Guangzhou and other parts and bringing their Christianity to China. Chinese people becoming Christian in Africa. Um, the Back to Jerusalem movement, where Chinese Christians are evangelizing in the Middle East, in Muslim countries in places like Nepal, all of the different Buddhist actors, including China, trying to establish a stake in the sacred sites So when I was doing field research in Lumbini, you could find Chinese state Buddhism, you could find Siji, but you could also find Chinese Christian house church proselytizing to local Nepalese. Then you have the interesting factor of Iguan Dao and other basically Taiwanese religious movements that, in a sense, in the shadow or in the head, in the backwinds of the BRI, are proselytizing and spreading to countries, spreading in BRI countries such as Cambodia and South Africa. We could go on and on this. Then we have the New Age circulations between India and China. And so there will be so many different examples of this. It's really interesting. And the key points here is that China is not only an importer of religion, but an exporter too. China exports Christianity and Islam in addition to Buddhism, Taoism, and diasporic religion. Now, however, we have non-People's Republic of China Chinese societies. Taiwan and historic diasporic communities are important sources and nodes of transnational religious networks exporting religion to other countries. With the rise of global China, BRI countries become sites for the interplay between PRC and non-PRC transnational Chinese religiosities and cultural influences. Overall, these religious circulations and interactions are an interesting phenomenon, but they don't have a determinative impact on China's relations with the global South. So actually, at the end of the day, the most important, we could say, place where the religious factor becomes a really big factor is at localized responses to BRI projects. So one of our collaborators, Laura Kick, gave what I could call a paradigmatic case, the Myitsone Dam project in Myanmar. And his article is in our special issue of Modern Asian Studies. And so basically, we had a massive dam project that was canceled by the Myanmar government in 2011. This was going to be just about as big as the Three Gorges Dam. It was strongly supported by the Myanmar government, the army, even local ethnic communities. And yet, it was because a few of the affected villagers were Baptist, and they were able to, they organized, use the religious networks to organize an opposition to the dam. And there was a process of sacralization from the Christian community, then spreading out to the non-Christians until it spread to the entire country. The sacralization or the amplification of the sacred nation, the sacred role of the Irrawaddy River, leading to the generalized opposition of the project, which ultimately then was canceled by the government. And so what we see here is feedback loops where very localized religious groups then connect with different groups at the national level, that connect with different groups at the international level, and that feeds back. And so then a highly localized issue could become an international one, and it leads to in this case, the cancellation of the project. Of course, this was only one of multiple factors that contributed to the cancellation of the project. Then we've had many issues in Pakistan, for example, and what we could see here again is also it's not simply a question, after I've done some field research in Pakistan, not simply a question of the existence of religious radicals in a particular location, that is true, but how these localized, we could say, religious ecologies can be triggered or amplified through we could say, very minor labor disputes or things like that to become major incidents that have severe impacts on the progression of projects. So here we have we have feedback loops with localized grievances and localized radical groups that can be instrumentalized by national and international forces shaped by geopolitical tensions. So basically, and so it's really in local settings that the rubber hits the road, we could say, or the rubber hits the Belt and Road. Religious actors are one among many types of deeply intertwined factors influencing community responses to BRI projects. Religious sacralities and organizations can become vehicles for the expression of grievances or opposition. Thus, tensions over projects can lead to the amplification of religious factors. While responses to BRI projects take place in the context of local communities with their specific sacralities and religious ecologies, they can be connected to national and transnational religious and civil society networks and be cast into geopolitical fault lines. Local issues may thus have national and international implications. So finally, The conclusion to this is that religion can't be separated from the socio-political and cultural dimensions of the BRI. There are different dynamics of sacralization at the national, transnational, and local levels. There is interplay between the three levels, and yet they also have their, we could say, their autonomous dynamics. But it's really at the local level that there's the greatest potential for religious impacts that may reverberate at the national and international levels. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, hi. Good morning from Hong Kong. Thank you very much for having me here. So I'm following up David's fascinating presentation on this topic, and I'm bringing you. Let me share my screen. I'm bringing you one particular case. So we are moving from the general concept to the religious factor to a more particular case that is North Laos. So my topic today is mega infrastructure, cosmological friction, and Northern Laos. I'm going to present basically four main points. One is about the mega project in Laos and the importance, and this is connecting with what David was presenting before, all these expansion of mega projects coming from China's money and development ideas, and also other countries around. And then I go to a particular concept I'm working on that I have labeled cosmological friction. That is a more technical application of this religious factor. What happened with these mega projects are happening, and how is interaction with these local communities? I introduce in a single case is I've been working with the Laos China Railway that is being so far transformative for Laos, and I will bring the two of the elements that I'm working on this particular topic. One connects with the spiritual ownership of the land, and then also the changes that Laos is facing now in terms of what I call the space-time, how the train is synchronizing and changing the country. As David was mentioning before, we started working in Laos more than 10 years now, in 2015, well, exactly 10 years now. And I started working with communities. I spent 10 years in North Laos doing field work among the Lanten Yao, which is an ethnic group that moved from China 200 years ago, slowly migrating to Vietnam, to Laos. And the regional studies is about the Taoism and these particular communities. But the question in Laos is we have a high level of diversity in terms of ethnicities. We are working in the northern region, not far from the Golden Triangle. There is a huge area of development where half of the population are minorities, which creates a very special environment. We have recently published this article about the infrastructure, and David and I developed this concept of sedimentations and how things have been changing in the last centuries, but how also things don't change at all. We see how it seems that we are facing a totally new thing with the One Belt, One Road, but it will go through history. When the colonial powers arrived to this region, something similar happened. Is the roads were open, telegraph arrived, social change happened, and we can see through history that things come and go, and that there is not so different to the past. So we develop all these notions in this particular article. Today I'm bringing to you these mega projects, and mega projects are defined by the scale. They are massive, they are transformative, they are very expensive, and they request a connection of many agencies and actors. We are talking about countries, we are talking about NGOs, we are talking about local societies. So their capacity to transform communities, especially local communities, is massive. but they also transform countries at the core. And with the Laos case, because I will discuss this soon later, because it's such a small country, a mega project can be fully transformative. The Lao-China Railway is perfectly, it's a case that really defines how powerful these mega projects are. And what we see now is a global transformation. There is mega projects happening basically everywhere in the world at this moment. And using Laos as a case, we can see what is coming in the future, basically. Is mega projects happen. People usually see the One Belt, One Road as a single happening. You make a road, you make a railway, you make a dam, you make something, and it looks like there is an element that is single, is a mega project. But then this is a milestone. Once the road is built, people start to circulate, commodities are exchanged, there is a communication, there is the pace of the life start to accelerate. So this is really when the change starts. So this is going to be transforming countries and societies and the world for the coming years. This is going to be massive change. And Laos is a very good example. Laos is a very small country. So in theory, it should not be so important, but the location is ideal because it's basically the bridge that is connecting China to Southeast Asia. The population is very small, 7 million. It's basically a small Chinese city. Half of the population are minority groups. We have 50 official groups. And although in terms of numbers and size, it is small Chinese city, the impact that any project is built in Laos means for this small population, massive changes, especially because we are dealing with the small societies. So for example, in our case with the Lanten, that is a population of 10,000 people, if you create a project next to this society, it is totally transformative. It fully changes an entire society. That is the importance of this mega project in these countries. We have, as I mentioned, many mega projects going on in Laos at the moment. There is going a revolution in Laos because it's trying to become the battery of Southeast Asia. So we have solar projects, we have windmill projects, we have new dams developing along the Mekong. And together with these mega projects, we have also smart cities growing. We are working at the moment in two city projects. One is Boten in the Lao-China border, and the other one is Tampuan, is a casino city at the moment being transformed from a ruthless casino area, a little bit in the gray market, to basically becoming a theme park more similar to Macau, that is going to be open to family tourism. This is the current transformation at the moment. You need to frame these cities in the Lao context. In a country where we have roughly 7 million people, China is building these massive cities. Some of them are more public invested, and others are more like a private capital. Boten in particular is a cooperation between China and Laos. The Golden Triangle city is a fully private enterprise that has its own passport check-in. So if you want to enter the city, you need to show your passport, as it was a small country. And then here comes this concept of Laos as a cultural laboratory, and why working in Laos is being such a joy as a researcher. It's a very small country, but the geopolitical and economic position is central in Southeast Asia. Because it is such a small country, it's quite easy to travel around in terms of size. The pace at which it is moving, the development is going so fast that we can see year by year massive changes. Then, because there is 50 official ethnic groups, around 200 branches or non-official ethnic groups, we can see basically everywhere in the country local impacts in terms of local society. It doesn't matter if we are in the north, in the center, in the south, there is always non-Lao. Lao is the majority, So we have a lot of ethnic minorities moving around, in which the impact of any project is going to create a massive waves with multi-dimension impacts and transformations. That's why I label this as a laboratory of cosmological friction. What we have also is an environment that is quite unique. Laos was a very green country. Basically, a lot of natural parks interconnect with a little infrastructure. And now, because of the railway and the highways and the different projects, mining being probably the most extreme change happening right now in 2025, everything is changing. And then we have this cosmological friction as a concept in which what we have is the local views of the world, of the universe, of the forests, of the mountains, of the rivers that are shaped by religious understanding. The worldview is shaped by how each minority sees the world. In most cases in Laos, ethnic groups see the world as an animated space, as an enchanted environment. So the mountains have agency, there is deities, the animals, some of them also, they are seen as spirits. So the whole world is connected with the spiritual elements. And then that cross totally, that is the friction I'm talking about, that totally cross with this mega project and technocrats arriving to the place and choosing an area because it's ideal for the wind or ideal for the sun, ideal for them. And then is what is happening with the people who lives there, who is totally attached to the land. If we are relocating them and they are moving to another place, what is happening with their spiritual engagement, with the cosmological relationships? And sometimes this is done in terms of negotiation, sometimes it's not, sometimes there is frictions with the government, with the projects. And here is when this research basically starts. So I take one case, and this is what I'm bringing today. I'm working in other cases. I'm working with solar panels, with dams, in Laos, also in South Thailand. But this case today, because we have only 50 minutes, is basically focusing in the Laos-China Railway, which started operating in December 2021. For anywhere in the world, it's a very small project. It's 400 kilometers, a single railway, around 10 stations, running a few trains per day. All the stations are separated from the cities. And it is a small project, relatively. But when you come to Laos, it has been fully transformative for many reasons. The railway is basically cutting, like an opening a watermelon, the north part of Laos from Boten to Nong Khai. And basically, this is the last key, the last part that it is making happening, this Pan-Asian railway. So for many years, it was impossible to connect China with Southeast Asia by railway until this happened. For Laos, the railway is the first and only staple means of transport. I mean, Laos is a tropical country, and then when the rainy season starts, the pictures I'm showing you is part of my fieldwork. I go by motorbike, traveling around, visiting sites, and this is what we find all around. There is a lot of disruption because of fires and raining and flooding, and this is the roads that we are traveling. So the railway is the only one that is on time and functioning. So it has been transformative. Together with the railway, we are having stations, and the stations are becoming hubs for economic and cultural development. And around the stations, we also have smart cities, like the one being built in Vientiane. So the railway is functioning as a catalyst.
Can you just speed up a little so that Rundong could have a chance to talk?
Sure. Good. Then let me go faster. Well, this is some pictures of the railway. It is functioning as an encapsulated element. And what I was bringing you today is some of these transformations. So when we need to relocate people to different villages, what we have is, for example, when the people is Buddhist, you need to move the city pillar, you need to create different rituals and start a new community in another location. It means sacralizing, basically taming the area, because most of these groups believes that the land is owned by spirits. So when you move to a new location, you need to negotiate the spiritual ownership of the land. So Buddhist people have particular ways of doing that. Here we have spirit houses in which they honor the spirit of the land. But we have many, many communities. And in this particular case, what I'm showing now is a Taiwan community who was moved by the railway, and they have to conquer the land and do something similar. You see the gun here because they are shooting the spirits, and they are basically conquering the spiritual ownership of the land themselves. At the same time, what we have is the Lao state with its own idea of sacralization. And here what we see is how the train was engaged with the Sangha, with the Buddhist monks, and there was a Buddhist ceremony in which the train became somehow an ambassador of Buddhism for the whole country. The train was crossing mountains and unholy wild spaces, so it needed the protection. So the Lao state took the opportunity to use Buddhism and to expand the influence in a country where half of the population are minority. So we see that all this infrastructure create, and almost done, give me a minute, all these infrastructures creates a lot of micro spaces, liminal spaces, and real frictions in which religion plays a very important and significant role. I will cut it here. Other changes that the railway are bringing in terms of culture, all these mega projects come with technology, comes with changes in terms of space, of energy. There is concept of justice, energy. In my particular case, I'm bringing also etiquette and how the cultures are changing as different minorities interact more often with each other. And finally comes the question of replication of these mega projects. And what is very clear for Laos is that China is working with ecosystems. So you need to create a full ecosystem of banking, construction, technology, and it's very difficult to replicate. So this lab that Laos is allow us to analyze and to create a very clear picture of all these interactions. I'm going to cut it here so Rundong can follow with this, and we can develop this further during the questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Jules. Yeah, could you stop sharing your screen? Thank you. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. Today, my presentation is a little bit more an extension of what David and Jules have just talked about. It's still along the Belt and Road, but it moved a little bit away from the religious realm to a broader cultural aspect. So today I'll be talking about something, how Chinese people, especially those business people, actually talk about Africa, especially on Chinese short video platforms. So this research project was actually evoked by my initial observation of a very drastic change about Africa on Chinese social media. So here I would like to show you a few screenshots with many racial slurs. If you don't Chinese, that's fine, because I really don't want to translate these remarks, which are very, very offensive, which are about very negative view about many African people. So many of these remarks were made in about 2017, 2018. But in recent years, especially after the pandemic, on Chinese short video platforms, there mushroomed many accounts with quite decent number of followers which focus on very detailed everyday lives of Chinese people in Africa or about African people's everyday lives themselves. So this popularity first, should be embedded in a general context in China, especially among the business or in the industrial circle. Is this urge to going overseas because the cutthroat competition within China's domestic market or driven by many other issues. But the growing interest in Africa as a market is very much conditioned by this general interest in going overseas for Chinese enterprises. So to roughly categorize a little bit the genres of China-Africa related short videos. So as you can expect, many of, or I would say most of them are about tourism, pretty much depicting Africa as a tourism destination. And the second type of popular genre of China-Africa short videos is about everyday lives of people working in Africa, either employees or entrepreneurs. But the third type of short video is what interests me most for this research project, which is about business people sharing their knowledge about Africa and doing business in Africa. So many of them choose to stream their knowledge in the form of very instant, very immediate, very quick question and answer mode. So these are the other interfaces that you could expect if you choose to interact with these streamers. To give you an average profile of such streamers, they usually have about 1,000 to 100,000 followers. They are not the top influencers, of course, because their content is very niche. So their average number of watchers when they are streaming is roughly about 20 to 200. Again, it's not a very large number. They usually, these streamers, they claim to have about 10 years of experiences of doing businesses in Africa, but according to my ethnography, at least many of them are indeed, they are not exaggerating or bluffing. They indeed have very extensive experiences in doing business in Africa. And they are often middle-aged, and mostly they are men, but there are indeed some very impactful women entrepreneurs among the streamers. As I just showed, the mode of streaming is very interactive, and they mushroomed since 2023. So against this background, my research asks what kind of knowledge about Africa are produced and disseminated in the interaction between Chinese business people and their followers in Chinese short video platforms, and what kind of action does such knowledge dissemination lead to? So here I highlight a few keywords that I will explain a little bit. So first, why I focus on knowledge? This is because existing literature almost exclusively focus on scholarly or professional knowledge production about Africa, either in international relations or institutions of African studies or history of international knowledge production. So they are basically focused on professional knowledge producers like professors or academic researchers. But those knowledge produced in more popular channels is overlooked. So that's why I focus on knowledge of Chinese business people. There's actually no shortage of information about Africa on Chinese internet. So their knowledge is characterized by these characteristics. First, it's the appearance of first-handedness. So because those business people, they really have extensive experiences of living in Africa, many of their observations are not that highly theoretical. It's very in some ways weirdly specific. So for example, here I often hear in their interactions with their watchers or audience, they answer such questions. People from which province are dominant in the urban real estate market of Kenya? How many factories of tires are owned by Chinese in Nigeria? So you can see this kind of knowledge is very different from those knowledge produced or written in academic papers or books. And although they are those streamers, they have limited number of followers, but they are possible to influence people who will actually invest in Africa. So I have to say that small group of people, although the absolute number is quite small, it is still very important for understanding Africa, especially Africa-China people-to-people connections. And then why focus on short video platforms? This is because, again, most existing studies, they focus on institutionalized media like CGTN or documentaries produced by professional directors. And then there are other literatures, but they more or less they focus on the more institutionalized channels of media production. So I here pose my tentative argument early on. So I argue that posts and streaming by Chinese business people in Africa give rise to a particular body of knowledge which makes Africans and African societies more legible for Chinese audience. And I also argue that such knowledge dispels some common myths about Africa but reproduce others. Their representations of Africa tend to make Africa more legible in a capitalist way. Drawing in its two senses, first it's paint, it's describing, and then it's pulling as well, drawing Africa in and into the world of Chinese capital. So this project is a mixed method. I use both ethnographic and computational method. I collect data, online data, mostly from Douyin and Weixin Shipinhao. The computational analysis is based on a dataset of about 17,500 minutes of streaming data from three main streamers that I closely followed since 2024. And I also did offline ethnography with one streamer's in-person events. I will explain a little bit these in-person events later. So the profiles of these three streamers, they are two men and one woman, all of them in their 40s. All of them have about 10 years of experiences in Africa, one in Nigeria, one in Kenya, and one in Uganda. One man is in manufacturing and the woman is in e-commerce. And the other man is also in e-commerce, but he doesn't focus on the consumer market. He conducts business mostly with businesses. So namely, he sells those engineering machines, construction machines to other construction companies. So my ethnographic data shows that some of the common questions in the streaming, for example, their audience would often ask whether certain types of businesses are viable in Africa. They often ask cement mixing station, brick factory, tire factory, tile factory, mattress factory, or a few others. They ask whether it is profitable if I set up, say, a brick factory in Kenya. And another type of question is, I have certain amount of capital ready to be invested. Which industry do you suggest? So they are not the super rich looking for yet another opportunity. The amount of capital they ask about is usually about 100,000 to several million yuan. It's several hundred thousand United States dollars. So you can see they are not the super rich people. And I have such and such commodities available in China. How can I sell them to Africa? Or more simple questions, which country should I go if I want to invest in Africa? So common recommendations include Uganda, Congo-Kinshasa. And another question is Africa safe? This is probably the only negative question coming from the audience. And another concern of those audience is, I don't speak foreign languages. Can I go to Africa? And the answer to this question is often a very firm yes. So the streamers answer these questions in a number of ways. Here I just want to highlight this type, this characteristic. They often describe African countries in terms of 卷 or 不卷. It means competitive or highly involuted or not involuted. So basically, those streamers, they would recommend their audience to go to those countries where there are fewer Chinese people, because that means there's less competition among the Chinese people. And then there are other common answers. We can discuss them later in the question and answer stage. Here, I would like to show you an example conversation, which is very typical. Here, one audience asks, how would Kenya compare with a city in our Guangdong? This is an investor from Guangdong. And the streamer said, not so large as Guangdong, but it has one good thing. There are very few suppliers. For example, there are only 5 hollow bricks producers in entire Kenya. People purchasing those bricks need to wait to place their orders, and they need to pay a sum in advance. And the audience asks, we cannot compete with local people if we produce locally. And then the streamer said, all the brick manufacturers there are owned by Chinese. And then the audience said, what about red bricks? And the answer was, they don't use red bricks, only cement bricks. So you can see here a lot is going on in this conversation, but you can see first the streamer has very specific knowledge about a very specific market in Africa, and they are trying to make their audience understand the country Kenya in a comparison with Guangdong or with some environment that are more familiar with the potential investor. So these are also some other common contents. So I'll just skip here and show you a very preliminary result of the computational analysis. So these are the more technical details that I will skip here. So based on a word frequency analysis and also the semantic analysis, we can see here that some of the words, we focus on one of the streamers. We can see here, she focused on Kenya, Tanzania, and here going overseas, as I just mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. And then also this word means offline meeting. So these online meetings often lead to offline meetings, which are more profitable for the streamers. And here is a network, semantic network. You can see here they are grouped. These are the 2 countries that are more often mentioned by the streamer, and also Uganda. And they talk about products, industries, understanding, and making it real. And here are some of the main topics according to 2 different ways of modeling. So here I would like to show you one interesting observation is that you can see here that mobile phones and trays are highly frequently mentioned. So you can see here they are discussing very specific industries, which corresponds to my ethnographic observation. So I'll skip other streamers' data and write to the offline here. This is a typical scene of the offline meeting. you can see here they are actually, by attracting their audience to such offline meetings, they are selling them offline services. For example, business research visits to Kenya or other African markets, and they are charging very high for them. So you can see that the incentive for those streamers to make such streaming is highly profitable. So this is one incentives for them to do this. So of course there are also criticisms of them of those streamers. For example, I hear when I was doing fieldwork in Kenya, I hear some people say, well, that streamer, she is actually ripping people off, 割韭菜. So, and then some of them even criticize some of the discussion as very general or too sanguine for the future of Africa. So again, to repeat my conclusion is that here we can see a knowledge framework is emerging from the streaming of Chinese business people in Africa. They are detailed, dynamic, nuanced, but capitalist. Detailed information is passed on in this streaming, and some common misunderstandings of Africa are dispelled or qualified. For example, Africa is unsafe, Africa is poor, or African people are lazy. And while new cliches are constructed, for example, seeing Africa as China of a certain time in the past. And finally, the formation of knowledge of Africa has many channels. In addition to institutional and professional ones, I would suggest that popular ones should also be more systematically researched. So that's so much for my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks to all three of our presenters. Outstanding material. That's great. So for those in the audience, we still have 10, 15 minutes for questions. So there's a question and answer tab at the bottom that you can ask questions. I've got a few little ones maybe to kick things off. Yeah, for David's presentation, a small question and a bigger question. So the small one first. One thing that stuck out in your presentation is where you're sitting around the table with I assume would be Saudi Arabian scholars or like politicians. So kind of from that picture, I'm thinking how do deeply religious countries perceive Chinese atheism and or their religious policy, and how from their perspective, right? And kind of talking with other countries' leaders. How has China's political or business leaders shaped their understanding and kind of what has been their reception?
Right. Okay. So actually, in terms of field research on this topic, other than a number of trips that I've gone with Jos in Laos, in the post-pandemic, after the pandemic, I did a number of trips to Nepal, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and South Africa. And each trip was about 10 days to 2 weeks long. And during each trip, through some local gatekeepers, I tried to meet and interview people at all levels of society, from senior political leaders at the vice, like in Nepal, even former vice president of the country, all the way down to rural, like women's federation and things like that. So trying to get a sense at different levels of civil society, religious communities, and so on. So to varying degrees, this is what I did, either at the national level, like in the capital city, or for example, in Pakistan, both in Islamabad and in Gilgit-Baltistan, which is the region right bordering Xinjiang at the very far north of Pakistan along the Pakistan-China highway. So, I mean, that's a very, very big question. But one thing that, first of all, and I was actually very surprised by the overall tenor of a lot of the conversations, particularly in Muslim countries. First of all, actually, there is a strong secularizing trend going on in Muslim countries, which may not be always evident, but and that is particularly the case in Saudi Arabia, actually. So the country is downgrading the role of Islam in the political structure of the country to an astounding degree, which I think most people are completely unaware of. Um, so that's the situation in Saudi Arabia, which so is Islam as ideology is actually is really becoming less influential in the country. That was my deep impression. In Pakistan, it's very complicated, but basically, this is what I would say. In terms of the perception of China, its atheism and its religious policy, the whole perception of China is deeply shaped by the perception of the United States. And the perception of the United States is deeply negative. And so that leads to the perception of China being quite positive, or relatively positive. Um, uh, reg in alongside a open acknowledgement of being just not knowing anything or hardly anything about China, but the sense of being respected by China, which they don't feel they've been respected by the United States. This was coming very strongly from Saudi Arabia, but also which is a bit surprising. But in Pakistan, given the history of the US and Pakistan, it wasn't surprising, the deep anti-Americanism that exists there. So basically that leads to a generally positive disposition toward China among just about everybody that I spoke to in these countries. And then I think the elephant in the room that you're thinking about in terms of China's religious policy, and people's perception about that is, for example, what about the Xinjiang issue? But actually, what I found to be very surprising and this was among, we could say, more elites and people involved in scholars, think tanks, or government in these countries is, frankly, I think that there's practically an admiration of China's management of the dealing with religious issues. They have problems with radicalism and separatism in their countries. And so actually, um, they can actually relate to how China is dealing with what it defines as radicalism and separatism. And so I was brought to a de-radicalization camp in Saudi Arabia, which really reminded me of Xinjiang. So there we go. So it's really, I guess the point is, now obviously I'm just simplifying things, but the point is that um, there is one narrative that is in the West that Muslim countries don't want to criticize China on this issue because they have deep trade relations and they don't want to offend China. And to a certain degree, that's the case. But there's another side to this, which actually is there is a trend. These countries deeply regulate and intervene in religious affairs, and and to some degree, they would like to have the means to be able to do it the way that China does. And that's another side to this issue. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I mean the other kind of your categories of the universalizing and apocalyptic and kind of national religions as well. I don't know if you just have like real quick from the other side, from the Chinese side, is there do you see different strategies that they're developing and dealing with those three different kinds of countries? And is there a particular relation that you see going forward that will be that could produce the most problems or like the most possibilities?
So I think in terms of China's view or China's engaging with these different categories of countries, I don't think religion is a factor in in the way that China develops its foreign policy. So I haven't seen anything like that. But I think where things are shifting, and so that kind of could change the whole dynamic in the long term, is in a sense, and it's kind of what I was saying about Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and so on, that there's a strong pushback in those Muslim countries against um, the what I would call the crusading or the universalizing sacralization of Western countries going forth in the name of democracy, either in a secular sense in the name of democracy or in a religious sense, with Christian, this kind of thing, and then intervening in these different countries and causing a mess. So there's a strong resentment against this kind of thing, and this actually leads to strong affinities with China, who also have that kind of resentment. So now, what if the U.S. is kind of stepping out, or partly stepping out of that kind of crusading kind of will to impose its ideology on the world? There's a deep transformation going on in the U.S. and in the West. So if that if that changes, or if that is reconfigured, reframed, it's hard to know. Is it going to be reframed under something different, or are Western countries going to step out of that role? Then that has profound implications for how other countries, not only how they see the US, but how they relate to each other. If some of their affinities are basically based on their opposition to this this kind of sacralizing universalism. So that's kind of a big question mark. As I started this, creating these formulations, that was still under the Biden administration, which was very much, the democracies versus or authoritarian countries. It was very much that framing, this universal sacralizing framing, which has a long history. But now that's being disrupted. So what, what will be the implication of that? Then it's not easy to say. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And moving to Jos, your paper, yeah, something that really stuck out to me is the kind of the relationship of environmental transformation and local heritage, and kind of the role that that plays in creating these ecological zones. And I'm just wondering, like at least seeing some of the examples you gave, and I know at the end you were kind of like there may have been other examples you can bring now, but a lot of where the sacred zones are defined at a very kind of local level, and the tension even in the country itself between the local and regional and national dynamic. I'm just wondering from China's perspective, and when those problems occur, um, uh, how do they like, I mean, obviously they side with the national, but how do they like perceive sacred or allow space for that kind of local heritage to be preserved or to acknowledge, or and you just speak a little bit more of maybe the dynamics of that local national tension, and then how China responds to that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very good question. What we have here is a dynamic in which China basically deals at the government level, or it is government to government. So China deals with Laos, and then Laos is in charge, and that happens. This is what we see as a pattern. Then you discuss with the government, because China is reflecting how things work in China. In China, you make a decision at the top, and that spreads through different levels to the bottom and applies locally. And then they have their own systems within the party and systems for discussion. And they expect that each country has something similar. And I think this is one of the things that the One Belt One Road is surfacing, that China is finding that every country works in a totally different way, and some countries are very chaotic, and then you make agreements with the government, but the government changed in 2 years and the agreements are destroyed. It happened in Laos. There was an agreement for the railway signed many years ago, and then there was a change in the ministry and the agreement was broken. And then the railway was postponed for a decade. And then we come to localities, and it happened in one of the villages. Sorry, my voice is a little bit broken. Happened in one of the villages that this friction was spanned because the people in the railway agreed to support one of the local rituals. So there was a Khmu community. The Khmu is one of the ethnic groups in Laos, and they were relocating. And then there was, as part of the discussion, the company was providing new housing, which were very welcome. So the village abandoned the old location, they moved to the new location. But then the cosmological ownership of the land was involved. And the railway company agreed to support a fest to honor the deities of the land and to celebrate basically the new moving to the new land. But the funding never materialized. So, and we are not talking about a lot of money. The Khmu were expecting some pigs, some chickens, some rice whiskey to celebrate the new village location and to honor the deities of the new village location and give a farewell to the old one. So it is a quite common thing with all these semi-nomadic communities. You abandon one place, you move to the new place, and you have this renewal of the contracts. The money never arrived. And there is kind of resentment going on there. Then in another community, the houses that the Chinese company was building start to sink because they were building too fast. And then the soil, because of the humidity, give up a little bit. So you only need to sink like 5 centimeters, and suddenly all the tiles and the roofs and the windows start to crack, even if the houses are totally new. And there was no follow-up. So what is missing, and this is one of the conclusions and recommendations that we are seeing happening in Laos, is a follow-up. It is needed a follow-up with local communities. When you have one of those mega projects, the companies should not leave only things on the hands of the government, because the governments are in the capital city, and sometimes they don't care so much about the local community, the particularities. And to reduce frictions, sometimes it's so easy as acknowledge. David was commenting before that many of these countries have already resentments because of the colonial past, of geopolitical relationships with other countries. So when these projects come to one of these countries, and Laos was a former colony, it's very easy to trigger these old feelings and to bring the feelings that you have with other countries. There is a lot of resentment in Laos against France, for example. So when a Chinese company behaves in a particular way, they trigger all these elements that are in this memory, this collective memory from the former colonial past, and suddenly becomes like China can be like a new colonial power. And at the same time, in most cases I was dealing with Laos, and in these cases a rarity. Everybody was quite satisfied with the railway. They are very proud to have a railway. So in dealing with these cases, I think each country needs to be studied as a unique case because of the past and the colonial past, historical past, social context. And yeah, the question you were doing is, China usually don't deal with locality. It's a policy. They respect the structure. You deal with the state, and whatever happens is a state responsibility. They are not dealing with the impacts. They are not dealing with negative externalities. They are making a contract. We are building this infrastructure. This is our task, our job. We bring the expertise. Anything else is responsibility of the country. And here is where the problems come, because not every country has the same competence or willingness to deal with locality and with all these aspects. Or not every country is doing a proper assessment. We are seeing that in many cases, that they want to have modernity and development. And then, okay, let's build a dam. And there is not a proper study of what this dam is going to bring or the damage is going to cause. And only when the project starts to be built, people start to realizing the impact. And again, we can point fingers at China, but in most cases, the question is that many countries are not so aware of the impact of these mega projects. So this is something that we are going to see in the future happening more and more, because more mega projects are happening.
Thank you so much. More questions, but not enough time. It's Rundong. I have to turn to the final paper. I really enjoyed your paper as well. I like that you had a lot of the dirty laundry in your presentation. You know, the bad language, and I like the way that you dealt with it. And I'm one of the questions that kind of came up for me was like with streamers and social media, digital media at large, how could it like challenge and maybe reinforce older myths or perceptions about Africa? So kind of in your research is looking at what what are the good and bad effects of how the perception of Africa has changed among Chinese people? So is it I don't know, do you see it more as a cultural translation or a new form of soft power? Like a kind of
Yeah.
what are the yeah, what
Yeah. So I think the best aspect of those streamers is that their knowledge about Africa is very specific. It's they rarely talk about Africa in general. They focus on one industry or even very tiny very tiny details about that industry. For example, just in September, in Tanzania, it released a new regulation to restrict foreign people in 15 types of economic activities. And the rules were released in the morning, and I mean in Beijing time, and in the afternoon of Beijing time, there are already some streamers who are interpreting article by article of that rule to her audience. I think this is even faster than most of the official media. And of course, she was doing this because, well, if there are fewer people who, because of this new rule, they come to Africa, then there might be negative impact to her business. But still, I think because of her interpretation, this kind of very specific rule in very specific country, African country, can reach a very fairly large Chinese audience is something unimaginable in a world with just formal institutionalized media. So I would say it's very detailed, it's very fast. So it helps to dispel some of the very general vague notions about Africa. And because they also, when they are streaming, they try to show the real living environment of their businesses and their living experiences in Africa. That also dispels some myth about Africa, like most places in Africa are unsafe, or Africa is not a proper destination for investment. They often display their factories, their warehouses, or their apartments to let their audience know. Most of their audience are based in China. They are not outside China. They are not investing in Africa yet. But I think from this kind of streaming, it gives their audience a sense of very first-handness and real authenticity. So this kind of thing really helps to dispel some of those negative myth about Africa. But at the same time, I would say they reinforce the notion that Africa is a profitable capitalist frontier. Because they rarely talk about Africa for the sake of Africa itself. It's not a research lecture, say, on the history of Tanzania or the history of Nigeria. Their formulation or their interpretation of Africa is still very much in the logic of a very linear developmental time. So one trope that they use very often is that, well, Kenya is China 30 years ago. Kenya or Tanzania is China 40 years ago. They are mobilizing this kind of discourses to, of course, they are trying to mobilize their audience to really invest in Africa. Because it opens up an imagination, right? China in the past few decades, it saw a significant rise economically. Africa, maybe fewer people know about this, but if Africa is formulated in this way, maybe more investors would like to catch this opportunity, right?
Do you feel that it's like it's making the Africa legible to the Chinese people like you mentioned, like commerce and entrepreneurship. Is it like is it a one-sided view of Africa that will could create future problems like or is it already
Yeah.
creating kind of like another kind of misperception and kind of
Yeah. I would say it's because it's about future. No one can say for sure it's misconception or very accurate prediction,
That's
right? But I would say this is incomplete at least. So it highlights the pure economic aspect of Africa and its future prospect. It shows the characteristic of being a hype or being a fantasy in some way. And its real on the ground complexities, especially in its political, ethnic, and cultural aspect, of course, also religious aspects. Many of these issues are simplified. Of course, those entrepreneurs might have very detailed knowledge about certain industries, but they don't have enough to say about, say, the religion or the political situation. They just say it. Well, for example, in Tanzania recently, it held its general election. There were many deaths. There are also many protests. But the description of this is just very well. They might show some images or video clips, but they don't provide very in-depth analysis, political analysis of the situation. So this is what I would say their limitation. They might be very knowledgeable in one aspect, but omitting key aspects of other aspects. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we've reached the end of our time. Yeah, thank you to the three of you for coming to present here today, and I hope a year from now you can come back and
Thank you.
I feel this is the kind of topic that we need to address once a year. It's quickly changing, and will the Belt Road Initiative become one of mutual exchange or kind of reinforcing the old hierarchies of power? I think it's all of us are very interested to know more, and I think your approaches of looking at the global and local dynamics are really fascinating lens to see that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Great to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, everyone.
Aloha.
Okay,
Thank you,
bye.
Ni.
Aloha.
Bye.